In the quiet town of Montmerle-sur-Saône, nestled along the gently winding river banks of eastern France, time moved a little slower. The cobblestone streets echoed with soft footsteps, and the warm ember glow of gas lanterns lit the town each evening, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls of old stone cottages. In one such cottage lived an old man named Theo Morel. Theo had a job unlike any other. He was the lantern keeper. Every night, just as the sun dipped behind the hills and bathed the sky in lavender and rose, Theo would take his long-handled lighter and make his way through the town, lighting each lantern with a practiced flick. Children would follow him giggling, pretending to be his tiny apprentices. "Monsieur Theo," they would whisper, "do the lanterns talk when no one is watching?" And he would smile that secret smile of his, wink and say, "Only when the stars are listening." His cottage was filled with little treasures, old maps, music boxes that played waltzes from Paris, dried lavender from the fields, and jars of honey he traded with the beekeepers. In the evenings, when his work was done, he would sit on the porch with his cat meal and listen to the river hum its lullaby to the town. But one night, something unusual happened. That night, as Theo struck his first lantern near the bakery, where the scent of brioche still lingered from the afternoon, he noticed a soft rustling coming from the alley just beyond Madame Lefebvre's flower shop. It was not the wind, nor a cat, nor a late-delivered parcel tumbling from a cart. No, this was the sort of sound that made old memories twitch in one's bones. Theo paused. He leaned on his lantern pole, listening. Another rustle. Then a whisper. At first, he thought he'd imagined it. But it came again, a voice as delicate as a silk thread on the breeze. Not in French, nor any language he could name. Just soft syllables, like the sounds of leaves turning in their sleep. "Bonsoir?" Theo called gently into the darkness. His voice was warm, not afraid. After all, he had been the town's lantern keeper for nearly 40 years. He'd seen all kinds of twilight mysteries, foxes slipping through gardens, owls perching on his shoulders, even a traveling musician who claimed his violin once belonged to Debussy. But this was different. The children had already gone home for supper, and the streets were empty but for the hush of approaching night. With a quiet curiosity, Theo walked down the narrow alley, the flame of his lantern bobbing with each step. At the far end, he stopped. There, tucked behind a crate of empty flower pots, was a small, glowing jar. It pulsed softly, light spilling through the cracks in its old, mossy glass. Around it curled ivy tendrils that hadn't been there yesterday. He knelt slowly, the joints in his knees complaining just a little. His cat, Meal, had followed him, winding around his feet with a cautious chirp. As Theo lifted the jar, the whispering returned. But now it sounded like a memory. He didn't know how to explain it exactly. It was like hearing the sound of his mother's voice humming a lullaby from long ago, like the clink of his father's fishing net pulled from the river. It was warm and familiar, nostalgic yet distant. Theo carried the jar back to his cottage, his heart steady and full. He placed it gently on the wooden table beside his armchair, just under the framed photograph of his wife, Celestine. She had passed on 10 winters ago, but he still talked to her each evening as though she were just in the next room. Tonight, the room felt different, cozier, like something old and beloved had returned. He made himself a cup of chamomile tea, added just a touch of honey from the jar on the shelf, and settled into his chair. Neil curled up in his lap, purring like a tiny kettle on the stove. The glowing jar flickered softly on the table. Theo stared at it, the flickers reflecting in his kind, wrinkled eyes. He whispered to the jar as he had once whispered to his wife in the early days of their courtship. "I don't know where you came from," he said gently, "but I think I remember you." And the jar responded, not with words, but with a slow, warming pulse of golden light that filled the room with a peace he had not felt in many years. Outside, the town of Montmerle-sur-Saône rested under a quilt of stars. The lanterns Theo had lit glowed like breadcrumbs across the cobbled paths. The wind carried the scent of lavender and river water, and the whispering jar sang its gentle lullaby through the walls of the old stone cottage. And in that moment, somewhere between the past and the present, the living and the memory, Theo drifted off into sleep, held by the warmth of old stories, old love, and the softest glow of something timeless. Morning came softly to Montmerle-sur-Saône, slipping gently over the red-tiled rooftops like melted butter on warm bread. The sun nudged the shutters of the little stone cottage where Theo slept, still wrapped in the tender quiet of the night before. The glowing jar, now resting peacefully on his table, had dimmed with the rising light, its golden hue reduced to the softest amber shimmer, like a memory dozing beneath a linen cloth. Neil stretched on the windowsill, blinking lazily at the birds flitting just outside. All was slow. All was well. Theo stirred beneath his woolen blanket and sat up with a long, contented sigh, the kind only earned after a full life and a well-brewed pot of tea. He padded to the kitchen in his thick socks, lit the kettle, and placed a single sugar cube in his favorite cup, the blue one, chipped at the rim, the one Celestine had painted with a tulip the summer they'd visited Provence. As the tea steeped, he turned once more to the jar. It was quiet now, but something inside it glimmered with more than light. A kind of presence. He didn't understand it, not fully, but he didn't need to. There was a comfort in not knowing, a humility in mystery, like the way clouds moved or how certain smells could bring tears to one's eyes without warning. He reached for his walking stick and wrapped his scarf around his neck. Today was Thursday, market day, when the townsfolk gathered in the square with their baskets and chatter. Madame Lefebvre would be selling fresh eucalyptus bunches. Monsieur Chevrier would have too many onions and not enough change. Children would run, dogs would bark, and Montmerle would, as ever, hum with its quiet rhythm. But Theo had a small detour in mind. He carried the jar in a basket lined with cloth and took the path along the river Saône, where willows dipped their fingers into the water. The breeze tugged at his coat like a curious child, but he walked slowly, steady. His thoughts wandered to Celestine, how she used to hum a tune without realizing, how she loved dandelions even more than roses. About halfway down the river path, he paused at a weathered bench beneath an ash tree. It was one they'd sat on often, when her legs had grown too tired for the hills. He sat now and placed the glowing jar beside him. The wind rustled the branches gently above. Leaves fell like lazy confetti. Then, as before, came the whisper. This time it was clearer, not louder, not more direct, but somehow closer to understanding. Not words exactly, but sensations, warmth, laughter, the sound of a violin played from a distant balcony on a spring evening. And then a vision, soft and fleeting, bloomed in his mind's eye. A woman in a long, sea-blue dress walking along the river, her fingers brushing the wildflowers. Her hair was not quite Celestine's, but the way she moved stirred something old and tender in him. The jar pulsed once. "Are you memories?" He asked it aloud, not expecting an answer. But the answer came, in its own way. Not with sound, but with a feeling. "Yes," it said, without saying. "Not just yours, but many. Gathered and cradled like fireflies in a bottle. 1,000 evenings of love and longing, of music and meadows, all preserved in amber glass." Theo sat quietly, letting it all wash over him. Eventually, he stood and continued his walk to town. As he passed the schoolhouse, little Lucille ran up beside him. "Bonjour, Monsieur Theo," she beamed. "Is that a treasure?" He smiled and held the basket up so she could peek inside. The jar shimmered faintly, and Lucille's eyes widened. "Oh, it's like a fairy's night," she whispered in awe. "Maybe it is," Theo said softly. At the market, everyone greeted Theo as always. He handed Madame Lefebvre a sprig of thyme and told her it was for luck. He gave Monsieur Chevrier a fresh button for his coat. He always seemed to lose them, and traded it for a small wheel of goat cheese. All the while, the jar sat quietly in the basket, glowing faintly, offering its silent warmth to all who passed near. That night, back in his cottage, Theo set the jar once again beside Celestine's photograph. He lit a single candle and opened his window just a crack. The air smelled of baked apples and wood smoke. Meal purred by his feet. He sat in his chair, tea in hand, and stared into the golden heart of the jar. Sleep began to pull at him gently, like the tide. And as his eyes closed, he thought he saw the woman in the blue dress again, this time holding out her hand to him, standing at the river's edge. He smiled and slept. In the quiet days that followed, Theo began to notice something curious, subtle at first, like the faint scent of rosemary carried on a breeze. The jar, always warm and golden, began to glow brighter when others were near. Not everyone, mind you, but certain people. Children especially, and the old, and the lonely. He first noticed it with Madame Fournier, the widow who lived above the bakery and never quite met anyone's gaze. She had come by for a sprig of lavender for her pillow. When she stepped through his garden gate, the jar, sitting peacefully on a sunlit shelf, brightened like a fire being stirred. She didn't notice, not at first. But as they spoke, her eyes softened. Her words grew slower, deeper. And when she left, she lingered at the door just a moment too long, as if something inside her had been warmed. Theo pondered this for hours afterward, staring into the glass. Was the jar responding to memory? To sadness? to something unspoken in each person's soul? It was a mystery, and Theo loved mysteries, especially the quiet ones. One foggy morning, Theo took the jar with him again, this time to the old mill outside the village. It hadn't turned in years, not since the war, but moss still clung to its stones like memory to an old song. He sat on the steps of the mill, the jar glowing beside him, and listened to the gentle splash of the river. The mist curled around the trees, softening the world into a watercolor. That's when young Lucille found him again. She came skipping along the path, a satchel bouncing at her side, her cheeks rosy from the chill. "Do you live here now, Monsieur Theo?" she asked with a grin. "Only in spirit," he said with a wink. She sat beside him without invitation, as children do when they feel safe. "Tell me a story," she said, eyeing the jar. "A real one." Theo nodded, took a slow breath, and let the mist and memory swirl in his mind. "There once was a man," he began, "who lived on the edge of a sleepy river. He kept a lantern, just like this one, and every night he walked the banks to light the way for dreamers, those who wandered in sleep or sorrow." "Why did he do that?" Lucille asked, cradling her knees. "Because some dreams get lost," Theo said. "And some hearts do, too. The light helped them find their way back." She was quiet for a long while. "Is the lantern magic?" she whispered. Theo looked at the jar. It pulsed faintly, warm and golden and quiet. "Perhaps it's not magic in the way stories say, but it remembers. And sometimes, remembering is the most powerful kind of magic." Lucille nodded very seriously. "Can I be a lantern keeper when I grow up?" Theo smiled. "You already are." That evening, after Lucille had skipped away and the fog lifted, Theo walked home beneath a velvet sky dusted with stars. The jar felt warm in his hands, not from heat, but from presence, like holding the memory of a long embrace. He returned to his cottage, fed Neil a spoonful of cream, and lit his little lamp by the window. Then, placing the jar gently beside it, he whispered a thank you to the night. The village was quiet now. The shutters were drawn. Dreams had begun their quiet work. And in one home on the edge of Montmerle-sur-Saône, a lantern keeper closed his eyes with a heart full of light. It was a Thursday when Theo received a letter. Not in the usual way, delivered by post and dropped with a slap on the wooden kitchen table. No. This letter arrived folded neatly inside a book left on his garden bench. It was Les Fleurs du Mal, the worn blue edition he had once lent to the village librarian. But now, tucked between pages like a pressed petal, was parchment paper with ink slightly smudged. The letter read, "To the man who listens to the quiet. There is a story at the edge of our village. It sleeps beneath ivy and stone, where the wind forgets its own name. If you walk toward the orchard at dusk, you may hear it breathing." Eh? Theo read it once, then twice. He did not rush. He never did. But something in the weight of that little message stirred him, not into haste, but into attention. So that evening, with the golden jar tucked gently under his arm, he followed the direction of the letter's poetry. The orchard sat beyond the hill, where the trees leaned like friends in whispered conversation. Apricot and fig, wild and tangled. Their fruit was gone for the season, but their leaves still rustled like pages being turned. Theo walked the narrow path, and as the sky burned into lavender and ash, he began to hear something. Not a voice, not a song, just presence. A hush that wasn't quite silence. He followed it until he came to an archway of stone, crumbled and half-eaten by vines. It might once have been a chapel, or perhaps a school. Now it was a ruin, but the air around it was tender, like an old memory being retold. He stepped inside. The jar pulsed softly. Light gathered in the corners of the old structure like dew. Theo didn't speak. He simply sat on a low stone ledge and placed the jar on the ground beside him. And then he waited. Not for anything in particular. Just for what would arrive in stillness. First came the breeze, cool, like a hand brushing a fevered brow. Then the scent of thyme and old wood. And finally footsteps. Soft ones. From the shadows at the far end of the chapel ruin, a figure stepped forward. She wore a long gray shawl and walked with a cane carved with stars. Her hair was white, and her eyes, her eyes were the color of early morning fog over the Saône. "You found it," she said, smiling with sadness and delight. "I was invited," said Theo gently. She nodded. "I used to come here as a child," she said. "My brother and I would sit where you're sitting now and tell each other stories until the sky went black." "Was he the one who sent the letter?" Theo asked. The woman's smile faded just a little. "No. He passed away many winters ago. But I think some part of him still breathes in this place." The jar glowed brighter. They didn't speak much after that. But they stayed, sitting side by side in the ruin, as stars arrived one by one overhead. When she rose to leave, she pressed something into Theo's hand, a smooth, flat stone with a spiral carved into it. "A seed of memory," she said, her eyes shining. "For your collection." Theo nodded, and with a heart full of quiet joy, he walked home beneath a sky that seemed deeper than before. He placed the spiral stone on the shelf beside the jar, and as he drifted into sleep that night, the wind outside his window whispered through the trees, carrying the voice of stories not yet told, and those long remembered. The following morning, the sky wore a veil of soft silver, and the air carried the scent of damp stone and fresh bread. Theo awoke slowly, as he always did, with his body still half entwined in sleep's gentle grasp. The stone with the carved spiral still sat on his bedside table, catching the pale light in a way that made it seem alive. He wrapped himself in his woolen shawl and wandered barefoot into the kitchen. The kettle began to hum as he prepared tea, thyme and lemon peel today, and as the water boiled, his eyes drifted toward the shelf above the fireplace, where the golden jar now sat beside the spiral stone. He stared at the pair for a long while, not with any thought in particular, simply noticing. The jar glowed faintly, not because of the firelight, but from something within. Later that day, Theo walked through the village as he always did, with small, deliberate steps and eyes that never rushed. The boulangerie had already sold out of croissants, but Madame Rene gave him a handful of sugar-dusted galettes and a wink. At the flower shop, Monsieur Lavelle offered him a violet wrapped in a napkin. "For your thoughts," he said. It was the kind of day when the world feels very near to you. When the cobblestones have stories, and the shutters blink like sleepy eyes, and every door is a secret you've already been let in on. At the edge of the village, where the old mill once stood, Theo saw something strange. A small envelope tied with twine, hanging from the branch of an almond tree. He reached for it, heart calm, fingers steady. Inside was a note. "In the garden of the forgotten mill, there is a stone bench. Beneath it sleeps something that once belonged to the stars. Take your light with you." There was no signature this time, but Theo didn't need one. That evening, he returned to the garden behind the ruins of the old mill. The place had long been overtaken by thyme, yarrow, and wild poppies. Bees moved slowly between blooms, and the sky overhead wore a soft pink, like blushed porcelain. At the far end of the garden stood a bench of carved limestone, dappled in moss. He knelt. He touched the ground with both hands, and he felt it, a subtle warmth, not unlike the golden jar itself. Something waiting. Not asleep, exactly, but resting. With care, he dug into the earth. Only a little. And there, nestled among old roots and pebbles, he uncovered a box. Wooden, darkened by years, and bound with a clasp in the shape of a crescent moon. When he opened it, he did not find gold, nor relics, nor letters, but a small book. The cover was leather, etched with a symbol he recognized from the spiral stone. The pages were full of entries, not journal entries, not quite poems. They were dreams. Someone's dreams. Dozens of them. Written in looping ink, with dates that spanned decades. Some described gardens underwater. Others told of birds that spoke in riddles. One entry detailed a house made entirely of violins. Theo held the book close, and then he understood. That night, in the quiet warmth of his home, he placed the book beside the golden jar. Then he lit a single candle. He sat in his chair. He read one dream aloud, slowly, softly, to the golden light. And as he read, he felt something stirring in the corners of the room. The way an old melody returns to you. The way a scent opens a door in your memory. It was as if the house itself listened, as if it remembered. In the coming nights, Theo continued this ritual. One dream per night. Read to the light. And slowly, the dreams began to shape his own. They brought him to orchards that glowed in moonlight, to ancient libraries carved into cliffs, to floating towns where everyone whispered instead of spoke. He slept better than he had in years, and the jar glowed a little brighter, not in bursts, but in steady, kind-hearted light. The wind on the seventh morning carried the faintest scent of lavender and river mist. It wandered through the cobbled alleys, tickled the bell tower's bronze feet, and found its way into Theo's windows, stirring the curtains like a slow sigh. He awoke as he always did, quietly, gradually, as if rising from the softest of dreams. Today, the dream had been of a library with no walls, just endless rows of floating shelves drifting in the clouds. Every book hummed a different note. He had wandered through them barefoot, letting the notes wrap around his ankles like silk. He smiled to himself, not needing to understand the dream. He simply received it. After tea, chamomile and fennel this time, Theo took a short walk to the riverbank. The Saône shimmered, glassy and still, and the willow trees bowed low to greet him. Ducks murmured softly to one another as they glided across the water, like old friends who'd long since stopped needing to talk loudly. Theo sat on his favorite stone bench beneath the willow, the same one where, years ago, he had once written a letter to no one in particular and tucked it into the roots. He wondered if the tree had kept it. He liked to think so. That afternoon, while dusting the top shelf in his little library, a shelf he hadn't touched in years, Theo found something he didn't remember owning. A bell. Small, silver, and shaped like a flower. No dust on it. No tarnish. It looked new, but old in another way, like it had always existed, waiting for the moment it would be needed. When he picked it up, it didn't chime right away. But as he turned to set it down, the bell gave a single, quiet ring. Clear. Clean. Like the sound of a memory returning. That night, he placed the bell beside the glowing jar and the dream book. The jar's light danced gently along the silver petals of the bell. For a moment, the room felt like a chapel of hush and time. He chose a new dream to read aloud. I dreamt I lived in a cottage made of bread and fennel, beside a sea that whispered my name. The moon came to tea every Wednesday. She wore gloves made of stars. Theo read slowly, letting each word settle. And when he finished, he rang the bell once. The sound drifted upward like steam, rising into the beams of his ceiling. And in that moment, the golden jar glowed a little warmer, almost grateful. Later, when Theo slipped into bed, the air in the room held a softness he hadn't noticed before, as if something invisible had tucked him in. He closed his eyes and thought of bread cottages, and moons in gloves, and bells that remembered things you forgot. And then he slept, like the sky when the stars return. It was a market day in Montmerle. Theo didn't need a calendar to know. He could tell by the rhythm of the footsteps outside. Lighter, quicker, with a fluttering sort of excitement that only came when stalls were opening and the scent of fresh herbs danced with the perfume of ripe peaches and old cheese. He dressed slowly, his hands brushing the linen of his shirt like he was touching memory. He wrapped a soft blue scarf around his neck, not because it was cold, but because it reminded him of his mother's voice when she sang to the morning light. The market was a gentle swirl of voices, laughter, and clinking coins. Everything smelled of earth and honey. Theo didn't come to buy much. A small wedge of aged Tom cheese, a bundle of thyme and marjoram tied with red string, one perfect fig wrapped in brown paper, soft as a secret. But mostly, he came to listen. He stopped beside a woman selling hand-painted cups and saucers. She had an accent from the south, warm and rich like the hills near Marseille. They spoke for only a few minutes, about nothing and everything, the quality of spring clay, the way glaze changes depending on the rain, how sometimes the most cracked cups hold the best tea. She smiled at him, as if she recognized something quiet in him that many missed. "You're a keeper," she said, tapping her temple, "of things not written down." He chuckled, not asking how she knew. Instead, he bought a teacup. Sky blue, with a barely visible line of gold across its side. A healed crack. Perfect. Back at home, he placed the new teacup beside the glowing dream jar and the silver bell. The objects looked at home together, like they'd always meant to meet. He brewed tea with thyme and a whisper of honey, letting the steam curl up like the pages of forgotten stories. And that evening, with the bell resting in his palm, he read a new dream from the notebook. "Last night, I was a paper boat in a puddle of stars. A giant cat carried me across the sky, and we never spoke a word. But I knew I was safe." He paused after reading, then rang the bell. And in the soft ring that followed, Theo imagined stars blinking just a little more gently that night. He slept near the window, letting moonlight stripe his pillow. Outside, a cat padded silently across the garden wall. Somewhere, a fig ripened on a plate. And inside the lantern shop, 3 objects glowed quietly together. A jar of light, a silver bell, and a cup that had once been broken, now holding warmth. The following morning came slowly, as if even the sun had chosen to wake with care. A pale blush crept across the windowsill, and the shadows of lace curtains danced on Theo's wooden floor like whispered music. The lantern shop was still, and in that stillness, Theo found something he hadn't in a long while, a kind of peace that didn't ask questions. He rose without hurry, padded barefoot across the smooth tiles, and put the kettle on. It was a lavender morning, the kind where time seemed to unfold like a paper fan, quietly, patiently, without pressure. As he waited for the water to sing, he opened his journal and traced yesterday's dream with his fingertips. He didn't write anything new. Not yet. Some mornings, the words needed to steep like tea. Instead, he sat beside the window with his fig and sky blue teacup and simply listened. To the birds. To the turning of the wind. To the language of old things. Around mid-morning, a soft knock echoed through the shop. Not a hard rap or a hurried knock, but a gentle tap-tap, like a branch brushing against glass. He opened the door to find a boy standing there. No older than 10, wearing a raincoat 2 sizes too large and holding a large book against his chest like armor. "I heard you keep dreams," the boy said, barely above a whisper. Theo knelt to meet his gaze. "I try," he replied. The boy held out the book, worn, weathered, filled with thick pages covered in charcoal sketches. "I don't dream at night," the boy admitted, "but I draw them when I wake up. Can I show you?" They sat together for hours in the back corner of the shop, the boy flipping through his book as Theo listened with a reverence usually reserved for choirs and cathedral bells. There were drawings of floating islands, upside-down oceans, foxes made of music, and trains that ran on stars instead of steam. One page held only a single image, a paper boat with wings. "That's the one that visits most," the boy said. "I think it's looking for someone." Theo's heart stirred. He remembered the dream he had read just the night before. Last night, I was a paper boat in a puddle of stars. Coincidence? Perhaps. But in Montmerle-sur-Saône, the line between coincidence and magic was very, very thin. He fetched the silver bell and placed it gently into the boy's small hands. "Would you like to ring it?" Theo asked. The boy nodded. With both hands he lifted the bell and gave it a soft chime. The sound shimmered like sunlight through fog. And in that instant, Theo felt something shift, as if a thread between two dreamers had been tied quietly, invisibly, forever. When the boy left, he wore a smile stitched together with wonder. The raincoat still swallowed him whole, but now he walked taller, as if buoyed by invisible wings. That night, Theo placed the boy's book gently beside the others on his bookshelf, now marked with a golden ribbon. And he wrote, "Today, I met a boy who does not dream in sleep, but dreams in pencil. His lines are lanterns, his pages doorways." Then he sat by the window again. Moonlight soaked the tiles. The fig was gone, and the blue cup glowed faintly, as if remembering something. The following morning came slowly, as if even the sun had chosen to wake with care. A pale blush crept across the windowsill, and the shadows of lace curtains danced on Theo's wooden floor like whispered music. The lantern shop was still, and in that stillness, Theo found something he hadn't in a long while, a kind of peace that didn't ask questions. He rose without hurry, padded barefoot across the smooth tiles, and put the kettle on. It was a lavender morning, the kind where time seemed to unfold like a paper fan, quietly, patiently, without pressure. As he waited for the water to sing, he opened his journal and traced yesterday's dream with his fingertips. He didn't write anything new. Not yet. Some mornings, the words needed to steep like tea. Instead, he sat beside the window with his fig and sky-blue teacup and simply listened. To the birds. To the turning of the wind. To the language of old things. Around mid-morning, a soft knock echoed through the shop. Not a hard rap or a hurried knock, but a gentle tap-tap, like a branch brushing against glass. He opened the door to find a boy standing there, no older than 10, wearing a raincoat 2 sizes too large and holding a large book against his chest like armor. "I heard you keep dreams," the boy said, barely above a whisper. Theo knelt to meet his gaze. "I try," he replied. The boy held out the book, worn, weathered, filled with thick pages covered in charcoal sketches. "I don't dream at night," the boy admitted, "but I draw them when I wake up. Can I show you?" They sat together for hours in the back corner of the shop, the boy flipping through his book as Theo listened with a reverence usually reserved for choirs and cathedral bells. There were drawings of floating islands, upside-down oceans, foxes made of music, and trains that ran on stars instead of steam. One page held only a single image, a paper boat with wings. "That's the one that visits most," the boy said. "I think it's looking for someone." Theo's heart stirred. He remembered the dream he had read just the night before. "Last night, I was a paper boat in a puddle of stars." Coincidence? Perhaps. But in Montmerle-sur-Saône, The line between coincidence and magic was very, very thin. He fetched the silver bell and placed it gently into the boy's small hands. "Would you like to ring it?" Theo asked. The boy nodded. With both hands, he lifted the bell and gave it a soft chime. The sound shimmered like sunlight through fog. And in that instant, Theo felt something shift, as if a thread between two dreamers had been tied quietly, invisibly, forever. When the boy left, he wore a smile stitched together with wonder. The raincoat still swallowed him whole, but now he walked taller, as if buoyed by invisible wings. That night, Theo placed the boy's book gently beside the others on his bookshelf, now marked with a golden ribbon. And he wrote, "Today, I met a boy who does not dream in sleep, but dreams in pencil. His lines are lanterns, his pages doorways." Then he sat by the window again. Moonlight soaked the tiles. The fig was gone, and the blue cup glowed faintly, as if remembering something. The following week in Montmerle-sur-Saône passed like a breath held in the chest, soft, unnoticed, and untroubled. Mornings drifted in with warm light that gently kissed the cobblestones. The bakery across the square began filling the air with the scent of butter and almonds even before the bells of St. Pierre chimed. And each day, the little bell above Theo's shop door rang in its own quiet music. A single chime here, a double ring there, visitors trickling in like petals caught on the breeze. Not all of them came to buy lanterns. Some simply came to sit. There was the elderly woman who had lost her husband the winter prior. She came every Thursday at the same time, sat on the same chair near the window, and crocheted in silence beside a golden lamp shaped like a tulip. There was the postman who dropped off letters at the back but lingered to chat about dreams of train rides that seemed to never end, and cities made entirely of mirrors. And now, there was the boy with the too large raincoat, who had become a fixture in the corner of the shop. He came after school with a pocket full of black crayons and new pages to add to his dream book. Sometimes he spoke, but often he just drew, the scratching of graphite against paper the only sound between them. Theo had rearranged a small corner of the lantern shop just for him. A low table, a pot of chamomile tea, a candle made of beeswax that smelled faintly of honey and thyme. One particular afternoon, as the town dozed beneath a curtain of spring drizzle, Theo decided to take a short walk to the bridge. The Saône River, gentle and wide, ran just past the town square. It moved at its own sleepy pace, never hurried, always sure. The bridge itself was modest, stone, arched, with patches of moss that curled like old stories along its base. Theo stood at the center and watched the water. He had done this many times before. It was one of the only places in the village where you could hear the river sigh. It was here that he used to walk with Elise. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a smooth, worn stone. It was from one of their last walks together. She had found it by the edge of the river, shaped like a heart, and given it to him with a quiet smile. He hadn't known then that it would be their last spring together. Now, each time he came to the bridge, he brought the stone, as though letting it feel the river again through the air. He didn't cry anymore, but he missed her like the tide misses the moon. That evening, a soft wind returned to Montmerle-sur-Saône. It crept in through the shutters and stirred the pages of the boy's sketchbook. Theo stood beside one of his hanging lanterns, holding a cloth and slowly polishing the delicate glass. It was one of his oldest, a round belly with golden inlay, shaped like the phases of the moon. The flame inside flickered not with fire, but with something softer. It had never burned out, not once in all these years. He had found it once in a dream, or maybe it had found him. As he polished, he heard the boy speak behind him for the first time in days. "Do you think people can find each other in dreams, even after they've gone?" Theo turned. The boy was not drawing. He was holding up a page. On it was a sketch of the bridge, the one over the Saône. But in the sketch, two figures stood on it. One was a man holding a lantern. The other was a woman made of stars. Theo took a long breath. "Yes," he said gently. "I do." The boy smiled, and for the first time, Theo saw the outline of his own heart reflected in another. Not as something lost, but as something shared. That night, he placed a new card into the shelf of dreams. "When the living remember, and the dreaming speaks, love is never entirely gone." He blew out the candles one by one, and when he fell asleep, the bridge in his dreams was not empty. The morning light seeped gently through the shutters, casting long golden bars across the wooden floor. Outside, the village began to stir, farmers leading their horses, shopkeepers setting out fresh bread, and children chasing the first butterflies of spring. Inside the lantern shop, the air was thick with the soft scent of beeswax and old paper. The boy was already seated at his little table, his sketchbook open and crayons scattered like fallen leaves. Beside him, a steaming cup of chamomile tea sent lazy curls of steam swirling upwards. Theo moved quietly, preparing for the day with his familiar motions, dusting the shelves, checking the lantern's glass for cracks, polishing their brass frames until they gleamed like captured sunlight. Today, the shop felt different, almost as if it were waiting for something. The bell above the door chimed softly, and a woman entered. Her hair was the color of ripe wheat, and her eyes held the calmness of a still lake. She smiled warmly, and for a moment the boy's crayons paused in midair. "Good morning, Theo," she said, her voice like a soft melody. Theo's heart recognized her immediately, though he hadn't seen her in years. It was Elise's sister, Marie. "I heard from the baker that you've been keeping the lanterns alive," Marie said as she set down a small basket of fresh pastries. "I thought you might like these." Theo accepted the basket with a nod, his gaze gentle but distant. Marie glanced at the boy and knelt beside him. "You've been keeping him company?" The boy nodded shyly, pushing a drawing toward her, a picture of a lantern glowing beneath a starry sky. Marie's eyes softened. "He's got a special kind of light," she whispered. Theo felt a warmth bloom inside him, the quiet comfort of shared understanding. As the day drifted on, more villagers stopped by. An old man with a cane, whose eyes twinkled with forgotten tales, a young mother humming lullabies to her sleeping child, and even the postman, who brought letters scented with lavender and sunshine. Each visitor left with a lantern in their hands or in their hearts, symbols of hope and gentle light for the darker nights. In the late afternoon, Theo stepped outside. The village square was bathed in amber as the sun lowered itself behind the hills. The scent of blooming jasmine filled the air, and distant laughter rippled like a soft river. He carried a lantern shaped like a crescent moon, one of his newest creations, and placed it on the stone ledge of the bridge. The boy joined him, eyes wide with wonder. "Why the bridge?" the boy asked. Theo smiled. "Because it connects two shores. It reminds us that even when we're apart, there's a path back to each other." Together, they watched as the lantern's flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the water below. That night, as the village slept, the lantern shop stood quiet but alive. On the windowsill, the moon-shaped lantern glowed softly. Inside, the boy dreamed of bridges woven from starlight, of lanterns carried across gentle rivers, and of hearts that find their way home. And somewhere beyond dreams, Elise's smile lingered, quiet, warm, and eternal. The next morning brought a soft drizzle, turning the cobblestone streets into shimmering ribbons of gray. Theo stood by the window, watching the rain trace delicate patterns on the glass. The village seemed wrapped in a quiet hush, as if nature herself was taking a deep breath. Inside the shop, the warm glow of lanterns flickered gently, fighting against the gloomy light. The boy sat close to the hearth, his fingers tracing the lines of the lantern he'd made the day before, a delicate design shaped like a blooming lily. Theo took a slow sip of his tea and smiled softly. "Rain brings new life," he said, remembering the stories his grandmother used to tell him about the rivers and fields thriving after the storms. Just then, the bell above the door jingled lightly, and a traveler stepped inside. Cloaked in a damp, deep blue cloak, she shook off the rain and smiled kindly. "Good day," she said, her voice like the soft rustling of silk. "I'm Amelie, a scholar from Lyon. I've heard of your lanterns and their magic." Theo's eyes brightened with curiosity. "Magic?" he echoed. Amelie nodded, pulling a worn book from her bag. The pages were yellowed and fragile, filled with ancient sketches of lanterns and maps of stars. "These lanterns," she said, "are said to guide the lost, not just through the dark, but through the twists of the heart." The boy leaned forward, captivated. Amelie continued, "I've been searching for a place where light and kindness are kept alive. Perhaps Montmerle is that place." Theo nodded slowly. "We believe that every light holds a story. Would you like to help us write one?" Amelie's smile deepened as she settled in by the fire, the rain pattering a gentle rhythm outside. Hours passed like gentle waves. The lantern's soft glow filled the room, and stories unfolded, of stars that whispered secrets, of travelers finding their way home, and of hearts mending through shared warmth. Outside, the village seemed to breathe with new hope. The rain softened, revealing fresh green leaves glistening in the twilight. As night fell, Theo and the boy stepped outside with Amelie. They carried lanterns of every shape, lilies, stars, and crescent moons, lighting their path toward the village square. Together, they placed the lanterns beneath the ancient oak, their light a quiet promise that no shadow was too deep when kindness was near. Under the silver glow of the moon, The village settled into a peaceful slumber, wrapped in the gentle embrace of light and friendship. And somewhere beyond the stars, the stories of Montmerle whispered softly, inviting dreamers to rest and believe in the quiet magic of a single glowing flame. The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains of the little lantern shop, casting gentle golden beams that danced upon the wooden floor. Outside, the village of Montmerle-sur-Saône awoke slowly, wrapped in a calm serenity that made even the birds' songs feel like whispers. Theo stood behind the counter, carefully polishing a newly crafted lantern shaped like a delicate vine curling upwards. His fingers moved with quiet purpose, each stroke an act of love and care. Amelie, sitting by the window with her book of ancient tales, traced the illustrations with a thoughtful smile. As the village stirred to life, villagers began to arrive, the baker with flour-dusted hands, the weaver with threads of vibrant colors, and the children with curious eyes and laughter soft as the morning breeze. Each greeted Theo warmly, their faces brightened by the promise of a new day. Among them was Madame Renard, the village elder, her silver hair framing a face etched with kindness and wisdom. She approached the shop slowly, leaning on her wooden cane. "Theo," she said softly, "your lanterns have become more than just light. They have brought our village closer, reminding us of the warmth in our hearts." Theo bowed his head humbly. "It is the light of everyone here that makes this place special." Amelie closed her book and stood, her eyes shining with quiet determination. "I wish to help share these stories beyond Montmerle. The world needs gentle light in its darkest corners." With that, the three of them began to plan, stories to write, lanterns to craft, and letters to send to distant villages. They dreamed of a network of light, connecting souls separated by miles but united by hope. As the sun climbed higher, the shop filled with the scent of fresh wood and beeswax, mingling with the soft murmur of voices weaving tales old and new. Outside, the river gleamed like a silver ribbon, carrying whispers of the past and dreams of tomorrow. In the quiet moments, Theo felt a deep peace settle over him, knowing that in every small light, in every shared story, the soul of Montmerle-sur-Saône would glow on, gentle and endless. The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains of the little lantern shop, casting gentle golden beams that danced upon the wooden floor. Outside, the village of Montmerle-sur-Saône awoke slowly, wrapped in a calm serenity that made even the birds' songs feel like whispers. Theo stood behind the counter, carefully polishing a newly crafted lantern shaped like a delicate vine curling upwards. His fingers moved with quiet purpose, each stroke an act of love and care. Amelie, sitting by the window with her book of ancient tales, traced the illustrations with a thoughtful smile. As the village stirred to life, villagers began to arrive, the baker with flour-dusted hands, the weaver with threads of vibrant colors, and the children with curious eyes and laughter soft as the morning breeze. Each greeted Theo warmly, their faces brightened by the promise of a new day. Among them was Madame Renard, the village elder, her silver hair framing a face etched with kindness and wisdom. She approached the shop slowly, leaning on her wooden cane. "Theo," she said softly, "your lanterns have become more than just light. They have brought our village closer, reminding us of the warmth in our hearts." Theo bowed his head humbly. It is the light of everyone here that makes this place special. Amelie closed her book and stood, her eyes shining with quiet determination. I wish to help share these stories beyond Montmerle. The world needs gentle light in its darkest corners. With that, the three of them began to plan, stories to write, lanterns to craft, and letters to send to distant villages. They dreamed of a network of light, connecting souls separated by miles but united by hope. As the sun climbed higher, the shop filled with the scent of fresh wood and beeswax, mingling with the soft murmur of voices weaving tales old and new. Outside, the river gleamed like a silver ribbon, carrying whispers of the past and dreams of tomorrow. In the quiet moments, Theo felt a deep peace settle over him, knowing that in every small light, in every shared story, the soul of Montmerle-sur-Saône would glow on, gentle and endless. Crescent moon sparkles. ChatGPT. Part 14. The Lantern Keeper of Montmerle-sur-Saône. The Lantern Keeper of Montmerle-sur-Saône. Part 14. As the days grew longer, and the gentle warmth of spring embraced Montmerle-sur-Saône, the village transformed into a tapestry of blooming flowers and verdant greenery. The soft hum of bees and the distant laughter of children weaving through the meadows filled the air with a soothing melody. Inside the lantern shop, Theo worked diligently, his hands steady and skilled. Today was special, the village festival, a celebration of light and stories, was just days away. Every lantern crafted carried a wish, a hope, a fragment of the soul of those who held it. Each one was a beacon, designed not merely to illuminate the dark but to spark connection. Amelie arrived early, carrying a stack of parchment and a small basket of fresh herbs. Together, they pinned handwritten notes to the lanterns, messages of kindness, memories shared, and dreams whispered. The villagers had gathered in the town square, their faces glowing in anticipation, reflecting the golden hues of the late afternoon sun. As twilight approached, the village prepared for the lighting ceremony. Families gathered by the river bank, where wooden benches were arranged beneath ancient willows, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The lanterns were placed carefully, floating like delicate stars on the shimmering water. Theo stood beside Amelie and Madame Renard, his heart swelling with quiet pride. The flickering flames danced in the gentle night, casting long shadows that played upon the faces of those watching. A hush fell, broken only by the soft murmur of the flowing river. Tonight, Madame Renard began, her voice steady and warm. We honor the light within each of us, the light that guides us through darkness, that connects us beyond words. One by one, villagers shared their stories, of love lost and found, of lessons learned beneath the vast sky, of dreams nurtured in the cradle of this gentle land. The lanterns drifted slowly down the river, each carrying a whispered prayer, a hope sent forth on the currents. Theo's gaze lingered on a small lantern shaped like a budding rose, his own creation, symbolizing new beginnings. As it floated away, he felt a peaceful certainty. No matter the shadows that might come, the light of Montmerle-sur-Saône would endure, soft but unyielding, like the heart of the village itself. The festival ended with laughter and music drifting into the night, and as the stars began to twinkle high above, Theo knew that these simple moments of togetherness would ripple through time, a gentle legacy of light, warmth, and shared dreams. The morning after the festival dawned soft and golden, with rays of sunlight filtering through the gauzy curtains of Theo's small room above the lantern shop. The village was quiet, wrapped in a gentle calm that followed the night's celebration, a peaceful lull after a time of joy and shared stories. Theo sat by the window, a warm cup of chamomile tea in his hands, watching the river's slow, steady flow. The water still carried faint echoes of the lanterns, now only shimmering glimmers beneath the surface. He thought about the stories told, the hopes, the memories, the unspoken connections. Outside, the village was beginning to stir. Shopkeepers opened their doors, and the scent of fresh bread from Madame Leroux's bakery floated on the breeze. Children chased butterflies near the fields, their laughter mingling with the soft rustle of leaves. Amélie appeared at the door, carrying a basket filled with wild flowers. She smiled gently at Theo and sat beside him, placing the fragrant blooms on the wooden table. "The festival was beautiful," she said softly. "It feels like the village breathes a little easier now." Theo nodded. "Light has a way of doing that. It calms the shadows inside and out." They spoke quietly about the coming days, about plans to teach the children how to craft their own lanterns, to keep the tradition alive. The thought filled Theo with a warm purpose, a sense that even the smallest light could ripple outward and grow. As the sun climbed higher, casting dappled patterns across the cobblestone streets, the village moved with gentle purpose, neighbors greeting each other with knowing smiles, old stories shared beneath blooming trees, and moments of stillness that felt like a collective breath. Theo and Amélie walked to the riverside later that afternoon, their footsteps soft on the grassy bank. Together, they released a single lantern, smaller than the rest but no less radiant. It floated on the water's surface, a silent promise that the light within their hearts would continue to guide them, through quiet days and nights alike. The world beyond Montmerle-sur-Saône could be vast and uncertain, but here, in this gentle village, time slowed. And in that slowing, in the softness of shared light and quiet companionship, they found a kind of magic, simple, enduring, and perfectly at peace. Days melted gently into one another, each marked by the subtle rhythms of village life. Theo found himself increasingly drawn to the quiet moments, the soft creak of the wooden floorboards beneath his feet, the faint scent of lavender drifting from the window boxes, the slow dance of light on the river. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the distant hills, Theo and Amélie prepared lanterns for the children's first workshop. The tiny faces gathered in the lantern shop, wide-eyed with wonder and excitement, as Theo carefully showed them how to fold the delicate paper and paint soft colors. Outside, the sky deepened from peach to dusky rose, and the first stars began to twinkle faintly. With each child's lantern lit and set afloat on the river, a soft glow spread like a gentle embrace across the village. Amélie's voice was calm and warm as she told the children stories of the lanterns, how light had always been a symbol of hope, a way to remember loved ones, and a reminder that even in darkness, there was always a flicker waiting to grow. After the last lantern floated into the night, Theo and Amélie lingered by the river bank, their hands intertwined. The village was quiet again, but now filled with a new kind of light, one born from shared moments and small acts of kindness. In that peaceful silence, Theo realized something profound. It wasn't just the lanterns that brought comfort. It was the gathering, the connection, the knowing that none of them were truly alone. As they walked back through the village, the soft glow of lanterns still flickered on the water surface, a timeless reminder that in the simplest lights, there is the greatest magic. The days grew cooler as autumn slowly wrapped Montmerle-sur-Saône in a cozy embrace of amber leaves and crisp air. Theo woke each morning to the gentle rustle of foliage and the distant crow of roosters. The village seemed to hum with a quiet contentment, as if nature herself was whispering lullabies to all who lived there. One morning, as fog curled low over the river, Theo ventured to the village square with a small basket of freshly baked bread. The marketplace was awakening slowly, merchants setting up wooden stalls, the aroma of herbs and spices mingling with the earthy scent of damp soil. Theo paused beside an old oak tree, its branches heavy with golden leaves, and breathed deeply. It was in these simple moments, the soft murmur of village life, the steady beat of his own heart, that he found solace. The past with all its shadows seemed far away here. As the sun climbed higher, Amelie joined him by the fountain, carrying a bundle of herbs and wildflowers. They exchanged gentle smiles, the kind born from shared understanding and quiet companionship. "We should gather the children soon," Amelie said softly, her eyes bright with ideas. "The Lantern Festival was beautiful, but I think the village could use more light as the days grow shorter." Theo nodded. "Perhaps a storytelling circle by the fire, where everyone can share memories and dreams." His voice was calm, carrying the warmth of hope. Together they began planning, weaving a new tradition out of old stories and gentle laughter. The village embraced the idea, eager to gather beneath the starlit sky, wrapped in blankets and the soft glow of firelight. As twilight settled, Theo lit a lantern by the window and watched its flame flicker, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the world was quiet, but inside, there was a growing light, one that promised peace, belonging, and the gentle unfolding of many tomorrows. The evening air was cool and fragrant with the scent of cypress and lavender, as the villagers gathered beneath the great ancient tree at the edge of Montmerle-sur-Saône. Its tall branches stretched wide, like protective arms embracing all who came to share stories and dreams by the flickering firelight. Children nestled in their parents' laps, their eyes wide with wonder. Elders settled on wooden benches, their faces softened by the golden glow of lanterns swaying gently in the breeze. Theo and Amelie sat close, the warmth between them a quiet comfort against the crisp night. Theo began softly, his voice steady and calm, weaving a tale of the river spirits who watched over the village, whispering guidance to those who listened. The story moved like a gentle stream, flowing over the hearts of all who heard, filling the air with magic and peace. Amelie followed with a tale of the stars, ancient travelers who carried wishes across the sky, their light reaching even the darkest corners of the earth. The children's faces lit up with dreams of distant worlds and sparkling heavens. As the stories intertwined, the village felt wrapped in a shared warmth, a tapestry of memory, hope, and belonging. The crackling fire painted glowing patterns on faces serene and joyful, while the night sky stretched vast and infinite above. In this quiet moment, beneath the cypress's watchful gaze, the gentle rhythm of life carried on, soft footsteps on fallen leaves, whispered promises to the night, and the steady heartbeat of a community bound by stories, love, and light. As the embers of the fire dimmed to a soft glow, lanterns were lit one by one, their warm light floating gently into the twilight. Each lantern carried a wish, a hope, or a silent prayer, carefully whispered by the villagers before release. The lanterns drifted upward, a slow, graceful dance against the deepening sky. Theo and Amelie stood side by side, their fingers intertwined as they released their own lantern. It shimmered softly, rising higher with the others, a beacon of quiet dreams in the calm night. The village square grew still, save for the gentle murmur of the river nearby and the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a tender breeze. The lantern's glow mirrored in the water, as if the stars themselves had descended to bless the peaceful night. Amelie's voice broke the silence, singing an old lullaby passed down through generations, a melody soft and soothing, like a warm embrace. The villagers joined in, their voices blending gently, carrying a timeless promise of rest and renewal. The song wrapped around every heart, a lullaby for the earth and sky, for dreams yet to come and memories held dear. Beneath the lantern-lit heavens, sleep came easily, soft and deep, carrying each soul toward morning's gentle light. As the first light of dawn tiptoed softly over the hills, a gentle golden hue spread across the village. The world seemed to yawn and stretch beneath the warm touch of morning. The lanterns had long since disappeared into the sky, but their soft glow lingered in the hearts of those who had released them. Theo awoke to the sweet scent of blooming jasmine drifting through the open window. The familiar sounds of the village slowly coming to life, a rooster crowing in the distance, soft footsteps on cobblestone paths, and the quiet murmur of the river wove a comforting melody that welcomed the new day. Amelie was already in the kitchen, her hands busy preparing fresh bread, the warm aroma filling their small home. She smiled when she saw Theo, her eyes shining with the calm joy that comes from peaceful rest. Outside, the village basked in a tranquil glow. Farmers tended to their fields with gentle care, and children played beneath the blossoming trees, their laughter light and carefree. It was a day like many others, yet held a special softness, as if the earth itself was whispering a promise of hope and renewal. Theo and Amelie stepped outside together, breathing in the crisp morning air. They knew that life's simple moments, the rising sun, the shared smiles, the quiet harmony, were treasures far greater than gold. And in this gentle beginning, they found a deep peace, ready to carry them through whatever days might come. The river that flowed gently past the village was a quiet companion to the lives of its people. Its soft murmur carried stories from distant mountains and whispered secrets to the willows that bowed along its banks. On this calm morning, Theo found himself drawn to the river's edge. The water sparkled like liquid glass beneath the pale sunlight, reflecting the sky's soft blues and gentle clouds. He knelt by the shore, letting his fingers brush the cool surface, feeling the steady pulse of the earth beneath. Nearby, the village women gathered herbs and wildflowers, their voices mingling with the river's song. The children's laughter floated over the fields, blending with the gentle rustle of leaves. It was a symphony of life, peaceful and unhurried. As Theo watched, a small heron lifted gracefully from the reeds, its wings spreading wide in a slow, deliberate flight. The bird's serene movement echoed the stillness that settled deep within his heart, a quiet reminder that life, with all its changes, flows on gently, like the river itself. Returning home, Theo carried with him a sense of calm and connection, knowing that just as the river nourished the land, moments of stillness nourished the soul. As evening draped the village in soft shadows, lanterns began to flicker to life, casting a warm, amber glow that danced along the cobblestone paths. The gentle light created an inviting atmosphere, wrapping the village in a comforting embrace as the day slowly yielded to night. Theo wandered through the quiet streets, the subtle hum of evening prayers and distant songs weaving through the cool air. Each lantern seemed to tell a story, a beacon of hope, a memory, a quiet wish for peace. He paused near the central square, where the oldest oak tree stood sentinel, its branches reaching upward as if to touch the stars beginning to twinkle overhead. Beneath the tree, villagers gathered, sharing soft-spoken stories and laughter that felt like a lullaby for the soul. In the midst of this serene moment, Theo's thoughts drifted to the gentle passage of time, how days and nights, light and shadow, joy and sorrow blended seamlessly, much like the lantern's glow that brightened the darkness without ever rushing it away. With a deep breath, he smiled softly, embracing the stillness, ready to rest peacefully as the village settled into the quiet magic of the night. The night was deep now, and a gentle breeze swept softly through the village, carrying with it the faintest whispers of distant seas and ancient forests. The leaves rustled in harmony, as if sharing secrets only the night could understand. Theo stood at the edge of the village, gazing toward the horizon where moonlight shimmered on the calm waters. The world seemed to slow, each moment stretching gently like a sigh, inviting him to listen. The whispers were like a soft song, stories of old heroes, quiet acts of kindness, and dreams woven into the very fabric of the air. They wrapped around him like a warm shawl, soothing his heart and mind. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the peace settle within him, a calm so profound it seemed to cradle his soul. In that stillness, the worries of the day melted away, replaced by a serene connection to all that was timeless and true. As the wind carried the whispers onward, Theo felt ready to rest, knowing that with each new dawn, the gentle rhythm of life would continue, a steady, comforting beat guiding him through dreams and waking hours alike. As the first pale light of dawn brushed softly against the horizon, the village stirred gently from its slumber. Birds began their delicate songs, weaving melodies that floated through the crisp morning air like threads of gold. Theo awoke feeling the lingering peace of the night's whispers wrapped around him like a protective embrace. He rose slowly, savoring the quiet moments before the world fully woke. Outside, the garden bloomed with shy morning glories opening their petals to greet the sun. Dew sparkled like tiny diamonds on the leaves, each droplet catching the light and scattering it in gentle prisms. The day promised calm and simplicity. Theo prepared a light breakfast, warm bread, honey gathered from nearby hives, and fragrant herbal tea steeped with wild mint and lavender. Sitting by the window, he sipped slowly, letting the quiet joy of the morning seep into every part of him. It was a moment of stillness, a pause filled with gratitude and the soft hope of new beginnings. Around him, the village came alive with gentle footsteps and soft laughter. Life moved with an easy rhythm, as comforting as the slow rise and fall of the tide. With the gentle dawn, Theo felt a quiet certainty that no matter what trials the days might hold, there was always this sacred space of calm to return to, a place where the soul could breathe and find its song again. As the sun began its slow descent beyond the rolling hills, the village was bathed in a warm amber glow. Shadows stretched long and soft, wrapping the cottages and fields in a gentle embrace. Theo found himself wandering to the edge of the river, where the water mirrored the fiery sky. The breeze was cool but tender, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and wild thyme. He settled on a smooth stone, watching as tiny fish darted beneath the surface, their scales flickering like scattered stars. The rhythmic sound of water flowing over pebbles was a lullaby for the soul, steady and soothing. Memories of the day unfolded gently in his mind, the laughter shared with neighbors, the quiet moments in the garden, the simple joy of watching sunlight dance on leaves. There was a profound beauty in these everyday treasures, a reminder that peace often lives in the smallest details. As twilight deepened, lanterns were lit along the village paths, their soft glow like fireflies caught in glass. Families gathered for evening meals, their voices low and warm, blending with the song of crickets and the distant call of an owl. Theo felt a deep sense of belonging, of being part of something timeless and whole. The world around him hummed with life and love, a tender harmony that promised rest and renewal. Closing his eyes, he breathed in the calm night air, letting its stillness settle gently within. Tomorrow, the dawn would come again, and with it, another day of quiet wonder. As night deepened and stars pricked the dark velvet sky, Theo returned slowly to his little cottage at the end of a toil street. The air was soft and cool now, wrapped in that particular hush that only comes in the late hours when the village sleeps and even the trees seem to hold their breath. Inside, the lamps glowed with a golden light, flickering gently like tiny hearts. Theo moved without hurry. He had no need for haste here. Everything he needed was close, familiar, and kind. He placed a small iron kettle over the stove, filled it with fresh water, and opened a little tin marked Lavande, Ate 1932. The scent of dried lavender rose softly, calming and round, like a song from long ago. He took a pinch, dropped it into his teapot, and poured the boiling water slowly, as though not to wake the herbs too suddenly from their dried sleep. While the tea steeped, he opened his kitchen window just enough to let in the cool breeze. Outside, a cat mewed once and then curled up on the windowsill. Its presence was comforting. Everything was in its place. He brought the tea to the table in his favorite chipped porcelain cup, white, with little cornflowers around the edge. Sitting down, he wrapped both hands around the warmth of the cup and exhaled. There was no noise here, only the soft tick of the wall clock and the occasional crackle of the cooling stove. No cars, no voices, no demands. just the slow drip of time and the gentle scent of lavender weaving its way through the stillness. He took a sip. The tea was smooth and floral, like a memory of sunshine and wind. It reminded him of the lavender fields near Grignan, where he'd once walked with a woman whose name he hadn't said aloud in years. She'd laughed like church bells and sung to the bees. For a moment he smiled, not sadly, but softly, as if her memory had come to sit beside him again. The cat on the windowsill stretched. Outside, the moon was rising, round and luminous, its light washing the rooftops in silver. Theo closed his eyes. Not to sleep yet, but to feel the weightlessness of peace. He thought of his neighbors. Madame Lucette would be tucking in her grandchildren with stories of geese and kings. Jules, the baker, would be finishing the day's dough. And someone, somewhere, would be composing a letter they may never send. Everyone resting, dreaming, breathing in rhythm with the night. The teacup grew cooler in his hands, but he didn't mind. He held it close still, like one holds a memory or a prayer. He let out one long, gentle sigh, not from tiredness, but from fullness. Not the kind that comes from food or drink, but the kind that comes from knowing that you are exactly where you need to be. That here, in this quiet French village, in this little cottage filled with light and lavender, everything was, for tonight, enough. The next morning arrived not with a clang or alarm, but with a soft shimmer through linen curtains and the muted trill of sparrows in the ivy. The sun, ever so gentle, crept across the cottage floor like a careful guest, warming the stone tiles beneath Theo's slippers. He rose slowly, stretching not from stiffness, but from satisfaction. The kettle sang once more, and breakfast was modest. A heel of bread, goat cheese wrapped in waxed paper, and a fig, perfectly ripe and yielding to touch. But today, Theo had a quiet mission. He stood before a narrow chest of drawers in his study, old pine, worn soft with decades of use. The handles were small brass circles, and one of them creaked in a way that he found comforting. He opened the second drawer from the bottom. Inside were dozens of postcards. Some had yellowed edges, others bright stamps. Each one carried handwriting, not all his own, looping, slanted, blocky, poetic. Some in French, some in German, even one or two in Greek. There were landscapes of the Loire Valley, the streets of Vienna, the blue domes of Santorini. One bore a watercolor of a pear orchard in late autumn, its leaves turning like rust. He picked up a card with a painting of Mont Saint-Michel under a crescent moon. Turning it over, he read aloud in a voice that barely disturbed the air. Cher Theo, the tide came in quick today, almost like it was chasing the sun. We laughed and ran. I think the sea wanted to join our picnic. He smiled. Elise. From a summer 30 years gone. She had worn a sun hat with sunflowers and had always carried sea salt in a tiny glass jar. To bring good luck, she used to say. Theo read one card, then another. He did not rush. This was not a task, but a ritual. Each postcard was a window, and this quiet morning he let the windows open wide. Eventually, he came to a blank one. Just a photograph of a lonely bench overlooking a vineyard in Burgundy. He took a pen, slow and deliberate, and began to write. Today the sparrows returned. The lavenders survived the frost. And I still remember the way you held your tea, both hands, eyes closed, like the whole world was inside that cup. He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. Some postcards are not meant to be mailed. Theo placed it gently atop the others and slid the drawer shut. The air seemed still, as if the house itself had paused to listen. Later, he would walk to the boulangerie. Perhaps stop by the florist to ask if Madame Ray had any rosemary sprigs. But for now, he sat in the sun-dappled silence with a sense of company, as if the stories, the people, the moments in those cards had gathered around him once more, sitting cross-legged in the warmth, grateful simply to be remembered. And in the hush of that French morning, peace, once again, unfolded itself like a well-worn map. That evening, as the light waned into the peach-colored dust that only small French villages seemed to know how to hold, Theo did something he hadn't done in years. He unlocked the cabinet that held the old clock. It was a mantel clock, modest in size but grand in presence, dark walnut wood, a brass pendulum, and small painted flowers curving delicately along its face. It had belonged to his grandfather, who had wound it faithfully every Sunday morning with a silver key, humming an old Corsican lullaby all the while. Theo hadn't touched it in nearly a decade. Not since the day he misplaced the key. But now, and he wasn't sure why, he felt moved to open the little glass door and peek inside. And there, tucked neatly behind a folded handkerchief, was the key. He held it in his palm for a long time before he inserted it, turned gently, and heard the heart of the clock awaken. Tick, tick, tick. The hands were still, but the pendulum began its slow sway, left and right, as though brushing the air clean of dust and silence. He adjusted the hands carefully to the present time, or rather, what he guessed it to be. For in this house, time did not demand precision. It asked only to be noticed. The clock, now alive again, became more than an object. It was a presence, a quiet companion in the corner of the room, keeping company not with noise, but with rhythm, with steadiness, with the grace of something that had waited patiently for a reason to begin again. Theo brewed a cup of chamomile and sat beside it, listening. It reminded him of things that still worked, even after long pauses. Of friendships that could be rekindled, of thoughts not yet spoken, and of music waiting inside old violins. Outside, the lavender fields were lost in shadow. The owls had begun their soft dialogue in the trees. And inside, the clock ticked not to measure minutes, but to remind him that nothing, truly nothing, was ever too late. Morning returned like a breath held all night and finally released into the soft light of dawn. In the kitchen, everything seemed to glow faintly. The porcelain cups, the checked curtains, even the bread basket with yesterday's crumbs looked quietly purposeful. Theo stirred honey into his morning tea and felt a pleasant ache behind his ribs, the kind that came from peace trying to find a home inside a person who had long lived without it. Today, he felt curious. Not hurried, not restless, just curious. He found himself walking toward the old sideboard, the one with a slightly warped drawer that had once held apricots from Madame Leontine's orchard. It was where his aunt used to store linen napkins and leftover preserves. And sometimes, when the family still danced on Sunday evenings, a record or two. He hadn't opened it in years. The drawer groaned softly as it slid open, reluctant but obedient. Inside, nestled between a bundle of embroidered cloths and a half-melted candle stub, was a letter. Yellowed. Unopened. It was addressed to him, in his mother's handwriting. For Theo, when you are ready. He sat down slowly. The room seemed to hush around him, like the house knew something sacred was unfolding. He ran a finger along the edges of the paper, then carefully broke the wax seal. The letter was written simply, in a style his mother favored, clear, kind, and wise beyond noise. Mon cher Theo, if you are reading this, then something inside you has settled enough to hear quiet things again. I'm glad. You've always had a clockmaker's heart, even if you never built clocks. You repaired them. You repaired people, too, in the small ways they didn't notice. That is not a small life. This house breathes because you let it. It remembers your piano notes, your silences, your kindness. If you choose to stay, let the garden go wild now and then. Bake the bread without a recipe once in a while. Dance in the kitchen again. And when you are lonely, remember, clocks tick best with rhythm. So find your rhythm. Or let it find you. With love always. Man. Theo closed his eyes and let the letter rest against his chest. A breeze drifted through the open window, carrying with it the faint scent of basil and sunlight on stone. He didn't cry. Not quite. But something inside him softened like butter on warm bread. The letter didn't change everything, but it changed the way he held everything. And that, sometimes, was enough. It began, as many gentle things do, with the sound of soft tapping on a window pane. Theo was in the study, curled in the old velvet chair with a shawl draped across his shoulders, reading a book that smelled like musk and violets. Outside, the rain had begun again, not storming, not rushing, just falling, thoughtfully, like someone slowly remembering an old lullaby. And then came the tapping again. He rose and opened the window. The smell of wet earth and time drifted in. Standing at the iron gate, under a sea-green umbrella, was a girl with a canvas case slung over her shoulder. Her boots were splashed with mud, her coat buttoned crooked, and a little red ribbon hung from the braid in her hair. Bonjour, she called, smiling. I was told there was a man here who understands old things. Theo blinked, slightly amused. I might, depending on the day. She stepped inside the gate without waiting, her boots making polite squishing sounds. I paint rain, she said, but not how it looks, how it feels. He paused. How it feels? Yes, she said, shaking her umbrella. The loneliness of it, the comfort, the memory it pulls from stone and skin, the weight and the hush. You know, rain feelings. Theo didn't quite know what to say, so he poured tea. They sat at the small table under the window where the ivy peeked in, her sketchbook open between them. She flipped through pages where watercolor blurred and danced like 1,000 tiny whispers. Some rain fell in ribbons, some in question marks, some fell in silence, some in memory. There was one page where she had painted a figure alone by a window, watching the rain with their whole being. And though the face was faceless, something about it felt uncannily like Theo. "I dreamt that one," she said, sipping her tea. "Last winter." He nodded slowly. "It's a good likeness." She looked around his home, at the quiet clutter of clocks and old books, at the plant that leaned toward the lamp, and the piano that hadn't been played in weeks. "I think," she said after a long moment, "this is a house that remembers the rain, too." They sat like that a while. No need to speak. The rain spoke for them. Later, she left a single sketch behind, tucked between the pages of a book Theo hadn't touched in years. It showed the two of them sitting at the window, the rain outside turning to a soft mist, and inside, tea steam, shared silence, and two hearts listening to the same rhythm.